Hi, I am Jack Brewer, and this is the Wayward Sons Book Group, where we read and discuss my nonfiction book, Wayward Sons, NICAP and the IC. Expanding Frontiers Research is a Salt Lake City based nonprofit organization, tax exempt under Section 501c3 of the U.S. Internal Revenue Code. You can visit us at expandingfrontiersresearch.org. I also encourage you to browse the Expanding Frontiers Research Patreon, where you can find resources on topics like the Freedom of Information Act and conducting reliable research. If moved to make a financial donation, you can do that on our website or at our GoFundMe page, where we are a verified nonprofit with GoFundMe. Thank you for your interest, and you can find those links in the video description. Tonight, I am joined on the panel by Jeff Knox, Sharon Brown, Stephen Long, and Rachel Nelson. I'm going to ask that each of you please take a moment and tell us about your projects and things you're interested in, and whatever you might like to promote or for people to know about, websites, your interests, hobbies, whatever it might be. For instance, Rachel, maybe it's a little early for it, but I think you're about to release a new project, aren't you?
You know, no, I'm not. Someone who shall remain nameless was saying stuff to to mess with people, but in a good-natured way. But I worked with Jeff Knox for a while on UFO Sunset, which is mostly on hiatus, and UFO Sunset was a YouTube show and is now more of kind of just a blog YouTube show, and we'll see potentially other stuff. I've also been working on a big poetry project that's been kind of my main sort of thing that I've been working on for a while now.
Good for
So
you. Good for you. Thank you.
thanks, Chuck.
How about you, Steve? What are your interests?
Hey, thanks, Jack. And I'm sorry to hear. I was actually excited for a minute there to hear that Rachel had something new coming out. I was stoked. Um, yeah, I'm just kind of treading the old familiar stomping grounds since the Saucer Spooks and Kooks book was recently came out in documentary form. And it had a lot of cool, interesting footage and also files in there. It kind of reignited me and my interest for that whole kind of Paul Benowitz saga and stuff. So I've been digging back through that, trying to find, some of that rare footage and rare files that were out there. And treading over the old books, Mirage Men, Saucer Spooks and Kooks, Project Beta, just to try and flesh everything out a little more. So that's what I've been doing most recently. Other than that, people can catch me on UFO X at UAP or SAP if they feel so inclined. But yeah, besides that, and the Wayward Wednesdays, staying pretty busy, I guess.
Thank you. Glad to have you here. And Sharon, you are a multi-talented, multitasking person. Um,
Multitasking.
how would you describe your interests if you had to limit it to just two or three?
Okay. I am a literal soccer mom. Okay. And so all of my interests I balance in between soccer practices. Um, but I started a book group that where we've read about Russian and Ukrainian history, American history, Christian nationalism, all in an effort to better understand what is happening in our world today. Putting together big picture pieces. Then my next thing is I like to work locally to share sort of the same knowledge. And I am embarking on a venture with my local Methodist church to start some information sessions on similar projects, working with the North Carolina conference in terms of immigration and racism, which we've read about in some of our books, the history in the United States, to Christian nationalism and that sort of thing. So my interest is learning and sharing what I learn with other people to help me be more informed.
Thank you. And I endorse Sharon's book group. I am a member of it. If you'd like to learn more about that, please reach out. How about you, Jeff? I know you post a lot of UFO cases and do a lot of archiving. Would you like to further describe your activities?
Yeah, sure. So I apologize for being off camera. I sprained my back out yesterday, so I'm laying down in bed and can't sit up at the moment. So hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, I'm a historian, kind of archivist of the topic of UFOs. As Rachel mentioned, I was involved with the UFO Sunset project that we did on YouTube, where I would occasionally post lectures and deep dives on a lot of cases that I would look into. Most of my work is posting historical information on a daily basis about UFO cases. That information, I've collected through archival works over the last many years. My personal interest, however, is more psychosocial, cultural. I'm more interested in why people see UFOs, why people are interested in UFOs, why people investigate UFOs. So my interest over the years has moved more from the nuts and bolts sightings to the cultural, sociological, and psychological factors involved in the topic, which is why I find Jack's books and work so interesting, and why I'm in this book group.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And thanks for joining us, all of you. Thank you. And if you are listening or watching on YouTube and not up to date with the group, no worries. Being caught up is as easy as browsing YouTube. All of our book group meetings are recorded on Zoom and then uploaded to our YouTube channel in a playlist, Wayward Sons Book Group. If you would like to receive a free PDF of the book, just shoot me an email at jackbrewerblog@yahoo.com, and I will send you a free searchable PDF. And you may also sit in with us and join our discussion if you would like, and help us dissect these complex issues that we discuss. Thank you, everyone. We will be reading and discussing Chapter 7 tonight, the title of which is CI, not ET. And would anyone like to start reading for us? I'll also say, as we get started, one of the things we were discussing as Chapter 6 ended last week was a 1954 CIA cable from CIA headquarters in Florida, a Florida headquarter, to assets in Guatemala that were helping the CIA fund and conduct a coup of the Guatemalan government that the CIA now takes credit for and considers some of their better work is the way it is framed by historians. And this cable was encouraging assets in Guatemala to consider using a UFO hoax as an attention distraction from a white paper that had been published and made the news in Guatemala about CIA involvement in its political affairs. And we were considering that cable and the implications, and that's kind of where Chapter 7 begins, if anyone would please volunteer to read.
Okay, Chapter 7, CI, not ET. The 1954 CIA cable, alluding to the use of the topic of flying saucers as an intelligence tool for the deception in Guatemala, opens up a big can of worms. Entire books have been written on such matters, competently documenting decades of intelligence community interest in alleged contactees, UFO writers, and others who wade into saucer waters. A close and sober review suggests official interest is typically much more about ulterior motives and counterintelligence than extraterrestrials. Let's take a look at just a few of the many instances with potential correlations to the NICAP timeline. As one tale goes, a flying saucer allegedly crashed in 1952 on the Norwegian island of Spitsbergen and was obtained by the US government. The story bounced around for decades. The saucer, if it ever existed, was suggested at different times to originate from Russia or outer space, among other possibilities. The case was also said to be both a meaningless hoax and a matter of extreme importance, depending on who you asked and when you asked them. In 1968, a Russian science editor wrote an article critical of sensational UFO tales. He devoted a paragraph to the Spitsbergen case. Shortly after publication, a copy of the article was sent by airgram from the American ambassador in Moscow to the State Department. Quite interestingly, the airgram, now archived by the National Security Agency, carries the annotation "plant," quote, besides the circled paragraph pertaining to the alleged Spitsbergen crash.
Thank you, Steve. Let's already hold up there for a second and consider some of this, please. That airgram from the Moscow embassy to the State Department is a 4-page document that's archived at the NSA, and 3 pages of it are a translation of the article written by the Russian scientist that was published in Russia. And somewhere after it was in the possession of the State Department, we would presume, someone circled this part about Spitsbergen and wrote the letter "plant" beside it. So we're not really sure what that means. And I wanted to take a look also at, here is page 1 of that 4-page document. And we can see it's a 1968 airgram from the American Embassy in Moscow to the State Department. Subject is his article, the Russian scientist's article. And what's interesting about this to me, my interpretation, is that the reason the Moscow embassy is supplying this to stateside State Department is because it's an assessment of UFOs, and that it is making the State Department aware of how Russian scientists are framing it for the Russian public. And subtle as it may be, in my opinion, this is more about the reason the article was translated and sent to the State Department appears to me to be more about psychological warfare and assessing what the United States may or may not say about UFOs at that time and in the future. We can see here that the sender of the airgram notes that the scientist was debunking flying saucers completely, that he says they only appear to those who believe in them, and that UFOs do not exist. And he also, the sender notes that this is an abrupt change in some other Soviet articles that have been rather spectacular on the topic. So I think that that is important, that like that's an important point here. What this kind of seems to be indicating that the State Department was interested in 1968. And it's also, of course, interesting that it's not difficult to envision what this may have meant, you know, that it was a known bogus story that was put out into the media and the Russian science community, for lack of a better term, is easy to envision there. Any thoughts or comments on that?
Well, I was also wondering, without knowing much about the Spitsbergen case, which I think Jeff probably will be able to talk about this, but could it mean that the plant was the disc itself, or is the plant the story? You know what I mean? I mean, it seems like from what you're saying, and it would probably make more sense that it's just that the story was a plant, but I was just considering that, like, what if the disc itself was a plant, you know, like
Yeah,
an actual
yeah,
host.
yeah. Either way, yeah, it is kind of interesting. Another interesting aspect, like often when I've screenshot this, I'll just kind of do the main part here. But another interesting part is a couple paragraphs down there. I think they're alluding there to Frank Stranges and his spectacular stories of an alien in the Pentagon. You know, they're talking about the people from Venus, Valiant Thor, perhaps, or at least it's certainly in that vein. So it again, I think it's kind of relevant here that the Russians were basically like pointing out the Americans have some really odd slants on this. And yeah, would you like to comment on that, Jeff?
I mean, I think the story was just a plant in general. Like, I don't think there's any evidence there really was a case, or, you know, anybody actually reported finding a saucer there. I don't know the details, but I know Jason Colavito has a article kind of addressing this, where he presents a theory. Kitty. Sorry, a cat just jumped all over the computer. Now I can't see anything. Oh man.
We can hear you. Yeah, I hear you. That right, like different tabloids and whatnot reported the disc was whisked away into military custody, never to be heard from again. But that seems pretty dubious. Yeah. And if
found it just interesting that that one single paragraph was highlighted, considering that there was other instances on the paper, that one specifically was being noted as a plant, right? And the others apparently were just not commented on. I don't know what it means, of course, but
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
if you can go ahead, Jeff.
I was going to say, yeah. So, like, Colavito presents three potential options for why the story might have kind of been planted, and his conclusions were: A, either America hoaxed the crash as a message to the Soviets, just for generic reason; B, they hoaxed a UFO crash to cover up a weapons or vehicular test aimed at the Soviet Arctic; or C, America hoaxed the crash to cover up the recovery of potentially a Soviet missile, submarine, or other aircraft in the area at the time. And he points to the fact that, there was some, I guess, cosmic ray and Soviet research being done right near Spitsberg at the time, and that those could be the possible reasons why this story was in fact planted, by whoever planted the story.
Thank you. Thank you. And if you'd please continue reading, Steve.
Okay, about the time DCI Smith was inquiring how the UFO phenomenon could be used to improve psychological warfare efforts, 1952, a CIA-sponsored scientific advisory panel secretly recommended UFO organizations, quote, should be watched, 1953. The Robertson Panel, as it became known, informed the agency, quote, the panel took cognizance of the existence of such groups as the Civilian Flying Saucer Investigators in Los Angeles and the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization in Wisconsin. It was believed that such organizations should be watched because of their potentially great influence on mass thinking if widespread sightings should occur. The apparent irresponsibility and the possible use of such groups for subversive purposes should be kept in mind, unquote. In 1957, a member of the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization was indeed reportedly visited by intelligence personnel. The officers expressed a most curious stance on flying saucers and even seemed to circle back to the Spitsbergen case as explored in Mirage Men by Mark Pilkington. Dr. Olavo Fontes of Brazil took an interest in UFO investigations and joined APRO. He read a September 1957 newspaper column describing material allegedly retrieved from a UFO, strikingly similar to the dubious 1947 Maury Island case in the United States. A witness in Brazil claimed to have seen a, quote, flying disc while fishing and to have retrieved associated metallic material from the water. Fontes apparently found the circumstances of interest and arranged to have the material tested at Brazil's National Department of Mineral Production. Samples of the debris were also sent to the United States Air Force through the American Embassy. Nothing significant came of these tests. The samples reportedly proved to be mostly magnesium, but the case brought Fontes significant public attention. Lucky him, right? In early 1958, Fontes met Antonio Villas-Boas, a Brazilian farmer with a dramatic story of otherworldly beings who flew into his crop field about 3 months earlier. The Villas-Boas case is a whole nother head scratcher with far-reaching implications. At any rate, shortly after making the acquaintance of Villas-Boas, and maybe even because of it, Dr. Fontes was visited by 2 intelligence officers from the Brazilian Naval Ministry. They claimed to want to discuss the purported saucer debris. The officers proceeded to warn Fontes to stay out of the matters that did not concern him. They reportedly went as far as to assert that global governments were aware of the extraterrestrial presence and, what's more, wanted to keep it quiet. Some of the most sensitive information, they added, could not even be shared with the Brazilian president. How trusting of them to confide in Fontes. Retrieval of crashed saucers was reportedly discussed, including the mention of one from Scandinavia. Pilkington considered the likelihood the reference pertained to the Spitsbergen case. Pilkington considered the likelihood the reference pertained to the Spitsbergen disinformation story. Pilkington also contemplated the possibility the intelligence officers intended for Fontes to share their statements with his APRO associates and perpetuate the tales. I agree those issues are among the intriguing aspects of Dr. Olavo Fontes' saga. It is the fact that it took place during the formative years of NICAP.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Any comments on any of that, anyone? Rachel and I were discussing Vias Boas before we started recording. Anyone want to comment on any of that?
The thing with the Via Boas case is that even though it was years before the Hills, we didn't really hear about it in America until after the Hills. So it may have been the first kind of abduction that kind of were classic abduction that kind of we're aware of, but it was kind of reported, at least in the US, you know, after the Hills case.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Are there any other examples or instances when Dr. Fontes was credible or not credible in things that he said?
Would you like to field that, Jeff?
You know, I couldn't off the top of my head point you to anything specific, but I do believe there were a variety of cases where he was just not the most critical investigator of things, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head because
I like that phrase.
The
I thought
poor
it was,
guy, you know, he hears, at least the way the story's presented, he hears about some man that's fishing and sees a UFO drop slag into the water, you know, again, very similar to the Maury Island fiasco. And so Fontes says, hey, I'm in a UFO group and I'm a doctor. I'll, you know, take some of this material, and thinks he's being helpful or whatever to like collaborate with the Air Force, you know, like send it to the American embassy. And it's like, I guess they didn't have movies back then where, you know, the person in the horror movie runs to the police for help and the police are in on it with the slasher that's killing everybody. I don't know, but I kind of just feel for the guy. If I take it at face value, that he's like, the Air Force will help me. Like in Mark Pilkington's film where the guy does the song, you know, we wouldn't lie to you. This is an Air Force base.
yeah, I just wanted to talk about the Maury Island case for a second. That you compare to this other case involving debris. And yeah, the Maury Island case was pretty clearly a hoax. And I think that a good red flag for UFO cases is if there's some sort of like slag involved. But I think that that's really interesting too. I would wonder what James Carrion would have to say about that, because he, if I remember correctly, also suggests that the Roswell case was orchestrated by the Air Force or maybe some other organizations or something like that for the specific purpose of counterintelligence kind of stuff and potentially for other reasons. And I wonder, yeah, I wonder about the Maury Island case if the military could have been involved in that. There were a lot of charlatans involved for sure, but you know, it's interesting to consider.
Which, in my opinion, tends to get intelligence officers involved. That like, if y'all are just, you know, defrauding people out of their hard-earned money to get them to buy tickets or magazines or something, they don't really care. But they do start wanting to make sure that's all it is. You know, like who are you working for? What's your interest? Where's this money going to? Like, what's being done with these ill-gotten gains? You know, is it being sent to subversive organizations to parlay into more ridiculous material to distribute to the masses? Yeah, I think that when you get the charlatans, they're kind of a magnet to the informants and the intelligence interest. Yeah.
Yeah, this reminds me again of this of the Utah airship or the Utah aeroplane fiasco because basically the FBI actually investigated this group of Germans who were claiming to be testing aeroplanes in Utah. This is in 1917, or if I remember correctly. And sorry, I'm bad with dates and names and stuff like that. But and so Leon Bone, this FBI agent, actually looked into it, and apparently he was convinced, that they were like he like although like there was a it's a whole complex story, but I just wanted to talk about this one part where apparently this FBI agent was convinced that they were telling the truth, or that they, in any case, he kind of was like supporting them after investigating them. Because originally, right, like we can assume that the FBI was worried that these might be um, Germans who were kind of infiltrating the US for some purpose or something like that. But he became convinced that uh, uh, what seems to be the case is that he became convinced that they were on, America's side or whatever. But he also kind of bought into this really insane story about inventing aeroplanes and ascended masters and stuff like that.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I was kind of just an example of what you're talking about. I don't know how relevant it is.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's important to also remember Maury Island was the first case that involved men in black.
Was it?
Yes. And so a lot of people attribute it to think of the Albert Bender case that Gray Barker helped popularize. But if you recall, in the Maury Island case, he was met by men in black suits, black hats that basically told him not to keep quiet, or, made vague threats and, fit the typical men in black pattern. And so, that was part of the early Maury Island case. My other comment was just on the 1957 kind of sample. That would be the Yuba tuba. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Kind of a piece of debris from Brazil that Fontes presented. And unlike Maury Island, though, that sample has continued to make waves to the very present day. It's been tested and retested and brought up by Vallée, Gary Nolan, all sorts of people. In fact, there's been articles published doing isotopic analysis of it just in the last few years. Because a guy named Peter Sturek, who was an astronomer, had obtained some samples, I believe, from Fontes on a trip down there. And so he had maintained possession of them. He gave Vallée a piece of it, which Vallée then went and did various tests with. Michael Swords obtained a sample from Sturek in 2017, I believe, and had it analyzed again by another lab in Texas to do isotopic analysis. And unfortunately, like most pieces of slag or UFO debris, the results show everything falls within terrestrial normals. There's no reason to believe, chemically speaking, that this is extraterrestrial in any way. It was just very high purity. The main argument seems to be how high purity the sample was. It was pretty pure magnesium, which they figure would be pretty weird for somebody to find off the coast of Brazil, at the time in 1957. So there's some odd things with that story, but that story persists, unlike a lot of other UFO debris stories.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jeff kind of beat me to it, but I couldn't help but notice the the similarities to today's topic, when it comes to these materials, alleged collected materials, and then being tested with the help of governments, Brazil in this case, and even like you said, given to I think U.S. governments too, and nothing ever came of these tests, right? And it's just like the materials of today and of just a few years ago, widely purported and speculated upon by people like Gary Nolan and others. And then the test results never ever come out. You ask about them, and they basically act like, well, what tests? Oh, that thing? Yeah, I don't know. I'll get to it one day. And it was like the biggest thing ever when it was being sold to us, right?
Yeah, yeah, I tend to lean that way too. Like Rachel was saying about it's kind of a red flag that if we're talking about like a significant vessel, and then someone says, look, I have this chip here, let's test it. It's hard not to like it seems like the first suspicion would be a person that like really wants to believe and is grasping at straws. That if I saw a whole car and then my evidence of this is I have a flake of the paint that I want tested, I can really empathize with people are like, well, I couldn't throw a net over it. What did you want me to do? But it also just seems like it's really grasping at straws that like you end up with this 2 ounces of some kind of metallic thing, At least that's like just my, armchair analysis of it.
Yeah, I think it's.
I agree. And oh, go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Yeah,
no.
I think it's also worth observing just for listeners, I think, who aren't familiar with some of these cases, that with the Maury Island case, what happened was, which is really unfortunate, I think, that these Air Force officers collected the debris. This was after Kenneth Arnold, the famed UFO witness and pilot, was sent to investigate this case by pulp editor Ray Palmer. And but so the Air Force ended up with the alleged debris from Maury Island, and then they took it on a plane to go to I don't remember exactly what the course was, but they were going from Tacoma to maybe like Fort Lewis or something like that. And but then they ended up the plane crashed on the way there. So we don't actually know for sure what the debris even looked like, although I think Kenneth Arnold or someone was saying, well, I looked at some of it and it just looked like uh slag, and like, something, it looked like human debris, basically, pieces, chunks of metal and stuff like that. But the plane crashed, and which probably has nothing to do at all with the debris or anything, and probably just had to do with where they were flying and like sort of like the factors of flying at that time and stuff like that. But just wanted to point that out. Anyway, I'm sorry, Steve.
No, no, good point. I was just going to comment on because Jack was talking about the really small sizes of these alleged samples that are always being touted. Fractions of an ounce, flakes the size of a portion of your fingernail, and but they're never presented that way. Like if you weren't looking at like a scaled picture of it, they're not presenting it that way. It's just being called metamaterials and debris. And for anyone listening, you could think it might be a piece of metal the size of your hand, like a sizable, even that's some admittedly small. But certainly I wasn't thinking, I know a lot of other people have commented on this, they weren't thinking something that's about the size of your pinky nail or smaller, you know?
I would
Yeah,
default,
it's
I would think it was like the size of my car as you were saying that. I would
yeah, like,
imagine
oh
it's
wow, they got a door panel or something.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
I will point out that there are a few cases that involve large amounts of sample, i.e. slag. You know, for example, there was a case in Ottawa, near Ottawa, Canada, a famous case investigated by Wilbert Smith, that was 3,000 something odd pounds. They had to like truck it away, and I guess some got sold as scrap metal or whatnot. But it was a big, massive piece. Also, one of the more famous cases of debris, as advocated by people like Gary Nolan and Jack Brewer, is the Council Bluffs, Iowa case. And there was, again, significant amount of debris in that case, like a huge amount of heavy debris, supposedly from that case. What we have left of it, obviously, is only a much smaller sample. The other thing about the Maury Island, there supposedly are pieces of the debris. In fact, just this week, anti-gravity researcher named Tim Ventura posted a picture of the Maury Island debris that they have a piece of that they were doing tests at a place called Falcon Space Labs, which is researching anti-gravity technology. They're basically like modern day T. Townsend Browns, like trying to prove his experiments. But they just recently got a piece of it because there's a guy here in Washington State that they supposedly found some at the crash site, and who knows if it has any relation to the original debris at all. But like I think a historical society or something up there, or museum, was holding on to whatever this debris they had, and they've given out a few samples to have tested over the years. So that debris does exist, apparently, if you believe it's actually connected. And that's the other problem with these physical debris cases is rarely is the physical trace directly connected to a UFO sighting. It's found after the fact, right? So somebody sees a UFO, they think lands, they go out there and they'll find a hole in the ground or a piece of metal or something and think, oh, that must be from the UFO. But there's no real actual causal connection between them. They found something and it's physical, and it helps add to their belief that what they think happened really happened. And so they've got physical evidence. And of course, that physical evidence always turns up to be pretty ambiguous, like it's generic slag, or it's, that it's marks in the ground that could have been from a tire or who knows what, but so there's rarely ever any actual connection between the physical trace and UFO sightings that they're attributed to.
That's a great point. And it also takes us into the chain of custody is often rather ambiguous. I don't even want to go into it all, but I'll just mention one of the samples that To the Stars Academy was promoting was a caller into Art Bell's show. First came up with it. And then you're pretty much at the mercy of where some guy that called Art Bell said it came from, and like, how on earth at this point would you ever even try to know, like if someone presented, here's material from Maury Island that went down in the crash, and then so-and-so got it, and how did I end up with it? Well, I don't know, but here it is. I got it. That's a really difficult chain of custody there, which needs to be taken into account, like the things you have all brought up and Jeff's brought up and Sharon brought up about how reliable was this guy in the first place that, says he found slag and spooks are chasing him,
Yeah, that was the first thing I thought when he started talking, when Jeff was mentioning, this alleged slag that can still be seen. I'm like, I wonder what that chain of custody looks like.
And maybe
which Jeff had alluded to, of course.
Maybe some of them claim to have it, but these are things that it's concerning when people like Dr. Gary Nolan don't address publicly. that do make it sensational publicly, but then don't address the obvious questions that would come with it. Yeah.
Like, why are we to believe the guy that called into Art Bell's show and sent it in? Why are we to believe him when he says it's from Roswell? Like, it's just some guy with a piece of metal. A piece of metal that ended up with Linda Moulton Howe, who Linda Moulton Howe's own expert was able to recreate in his own home lab and showed her, hey, this isn't no big deal. I recreated some. He actually gave her a sample of the stuff he made. A guy named Royce that runs the UFO Watchdog has a sample of that Linda Moulton Howe's expert made. But you don't hear about that in any of the narrative of the alleged arts parts. You don't hear that her own expert told her there's nothing to this. And so she ignored the expert and then, started telling the story elsewhere. And that piece eventually got sold to the US government for dollars. That's insane to me.
What was it, like $35,000?
Yeah, like $35,000 or something like that. Like, that should be fraud, in my opinion.
It raises a lot of questions that don't get answered. I agree. Who'd like to read next, starting at the Robertson Panel carries ties?
The Robertson Panel carries ties to our trail of NICAP and the CIA. The agency-sponsored panel met approximately January 14th through 18th, 1953, and was briefed on UFOs. It was made up of 5 scientists, including chairman and physicist Dr. Howard P. Robertson. The group collectively concluded the evidence examined showed no indication of UFOs were a direct threat to national security. The panel advised, however, that reporting UFOs and wildly speculating about them was problematic. The threat arose in the form of quote, clogging of channels of communication by irrelevant reports, end quote, the related false alarms, and the resulting natural tendency to lower defenses. The panel further warned of a, quote, cultivation of a morbid national psychology in which skillful hostile propaganda could induce hysterical behavior and harmful distrust of duly constituted authority, unquote. The panel was not wrong, yet it bears emphasizing the agency did not overlook the opportunity for the offensive use of saucer-related skillful hostile propaganda itself, as already noted. Neither does it escape this writer's appreciation for irony that the CIA's Colonel Amos was among those clogging communication channels with irrelevant reports. Those interviewed by the Robertson panel included Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, inaugural director of Project Blue Book, a 1952 to 1970 Air Force official UFO study, at least outwardly. Ruppelt published a book in 1956 that first alerted UFO investigators to the existence of the Robertson panel. The CIA concealed its sponsorship, eventually preparing a sanitized version of the resulting report, which was subsequently released through the Air Force. All mention of the CIA and psychological warfare potential of the UFO topic was deleted for the published report, as the agency now acknowledges was the case. The Robertson panel had 2 associate members in attendance in addition to its 5 primary members. The 2 were Dr. J. Allen Hynek, along with rocket and guided missile expert Frederick C. Durant III. Later, the latter worked in the CIA Office of Scientific Intelligence and is credited with preparing and composing the findings of the panel. Thus, the resulting document is sometimes referred to as the Durant Report. Durant apparently developed an association with Major Dewey J. Fornett, who was interviewed by the panel. Major Fornett was a veteran of Air Force UFO study projects, including Blue Book and Grudge, and a future long-term member of the NICAP Board of Governors. Captain Ruppelt wrote of Project Blue Book and Major Fornett, I was beginning to spend as much time telling people what was going on as I was doing anything about it. The answer was to get somebody in the Directorate of Intelligence in the Pentagon to act as a liaison officer. I could keep this person informed, and he could handle the branch office in Washington. Colonel Dunn bought this idea, and Major Dewey J. Fornett got the additional duty of the Pentagon branch. In the future, all inquiries went to Major Fornett, and if he couldn't answer them, he would call me. The arrangement was excellent because Major Fornett took a very serious interest in UFOs and could always be counted on to do a good job. Fornett spent 15 months as a project officer and liaison for Blue Book. The Major told the Robertson Panel he eliminated known and probable explanations for a number of specified UFO reports. The panel acknowledged that his background as an aeronautical engineer and technical intelligence officer could not be slighted, but it ultimately did not accept cases he cited because, quote, they were raw, unevaluated reports, unquote. By 1960, Fornett was a member of the NICAP board and served well into the 1970s. However, cosmetic the position may have become by then. In a 1976 letter to future blogger Robert E. Barrow, Fornett wrote, "There has never been any censoring of UFO data per se," but added, "On the other hand, I'm positive that the public was frequently fed misleading statistics and examples of reports that were atypical, intended only to make the subject appear to be entirely asinine," unquote. Some might consider the statements to be indicative of an orchestrated UFO cover-up. Others might say it reflects findings of the Robertson Panel that the most serious national security threats posed by UFOs were related to propaganda and hysteria. Thus, reports of flying saucers were minimized by the CIA. Yet others might point out intelligence personnel, including agency officers at times, took conflicting positions on the topic over the years, both downplaying and promoting its significance as apparently advantageous. The motives could be many and necessarily change from one specific instance to the next. The January 1978 edition of the Just Cause newsletter leveled an accusation suggesting the CIA Office of Scientific Intelligence, excuse me, the CIA Office of Science Intelligence's Fred Durant developed relations with both Major Fornett and Captain Ruppelt in order to gain access to Air Force UFO information. Quote, Durant, posing as a civilian, befriended Major Dewey Fornett and Captain Ed Ruppelt in order for the CIA to gain access to the Air Force's UFO data as early as April 1952. The newsletter asserted. The story originated from quote-unquote reliable sources, it was reported. However correct the accusation may have been, I strongly suspect the primary interests of Durant and his employer were not related to either extraterrestrial or paranormal subject matter.
Thank you, Rachel. Let's chew on this for a while. That Just Cause newsletter is the same, is a reference to Todd Zekel and his narrative that we've considered a number of times of the NICAP story, according to Todd Zekel. And it's interesting, like, I don't know what Zekel's deal was, if he was just trying to convince himself or if he just wanted to have some degree of fame from being the guy that's, prying the UFO documents from the government, or I don't know. I don't know what his deal was, but I do still find it interesting that you could sell a story like this apparently to a significant percentage of the public, or at least of UFO people, that he's essentially saying here the CIA infiltrated NICAP to find out what NICAP was learning from the Air Force about UFOs, but didn't just ask the Air Force what they knew about UFOs.
Yeah, it's interesting, Jack, because you often note that we have plenty of evidence showing what certain individuals have done, right? And much like this case here, but not specifically as to why they may have done it, right? And time and time again in the topic, the speculation is asserted as to the why, widely and broadly, and it's often accepted because it supports the preferred narratives of the cover up, you know, and the subversion.
Yeah, and as we documented early, like in the first couple of chapters, the CIA went to NICAP and Richard Hall and said, you know, what do you got? You know, we're doing an evaluation. I'm compiling a report. What do you got? Give me your best evidence. And Zekel persists in all of this cloak and dagger stuff that I think existed to some extent. I just don't think it had anything to do with the reasons Zekel thought it existed. And I don't think, just my opinion, I don't think he cared. It was a story he could sell, and he liked selling it. Now, all of that stated, the biggest problem of this, and that truly frustrates me with it, is the intelligence services have had opportunities time and time again to point out unreliable narrators in the UFO community, and they clearly find it advantageous to not do so and to play both sides of the fence. And I'm not talking about just in 1968 or in 1957. Since 2017, the Department of Defense had repeated opportunities to clarify who did or did not work on UFO projects that may or may not have existed as the people were claiming that claimed to be working on these projects, and repeatedly were ambiguous or unclear in their answers. And I find that frustrating. I can kind of empathize that the Department of Defense, the CIA, the FBI is not in the habit of clarifying what it does and does not know for the satisfaction of Jack Brewer or anybody else. But it's frustrating, you know, that it'd be easy to go, Zekel's a sensationalist, this, that. But the truth is, the Pentagon plays both sides of the fence, you know?
Which, like you noted, is understandable, right, and should be expected for an organization like the Department of Defense, whose purview doesn't include vetting the truth and telling the American people the truth about specific things or anything, right? And they're going to, like you said, exploit and use information, and that's what they're there for, to use it for defense, right? But when it comes to people who are allegedly fighting for disclosure, that type of ambiguity and blatant misrepresentation is, I find, far less forgivable and understanding.
It's almost like a safe guardrail, isn't it? Like a kid that knows it's safe to scream at its mom, you know, and to throw a tantrum, and it's safe. Like it's safe to yell at the CIA that it's obstructing evidence of UFOs because it's, you know, just going to be like Sheriff Andy Taylor telling Opie, well, don't get your clothes dirty, like they don't care, blog all you want, we don't care. And if anything, it's helpful. And, another thing Zekel would write about was, that and the UFO community frames Kehoe and NICAP as rather heroic in the efforts to create UFO disclosure. And as I've said, I think a lot of NICAP personnel were good intentioned. I think some of them did some good work. They're not a monolith. There were different people. Just when it comes to Kehoe in particular, I don't see how he had the power to have chased the CIA out of NICAP if it had wanted to remain in NICAP, which it appears it did, as Joseph Bryan and others. And it appears that when a decision was made that NICAP was more problematic than not, he was relieved of his position. So that implies to me they were fine with what he was doing for about 13 years. I'm open to alternative perspectives, but I mean that's how I've kind of come to look at it.
Yeah, it's hard to argue that. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
I was just gonna point out that Frederick Durant kind of persisted in the UFO topic as well. We know for a fact that he met with Ruppelt along with other fellow CIA officer Philip Strong back in August of '52, at least. That's not as early as April, and they met again in December. And we know he was friendly enough with Ruppelt by December that when Ruppelt was ordered not to share good case information with the CIA, Durant heard it personally from Ruppelt over the phone. So it's possible they may have been in contact as early as April. I don't think we have any evidence before August that he was in contact. But Durant's only involvement, it didn't end there. Durant was also involved with the Walter Cronkite special, UFOs, friend, God, what was it? UFOs, Friend, Foe, or Fantasy. Michael Swartz found a letter of Thornton Page's in his archives at the Smithsonian that pointed out that Frederick Durant actually helped organize the whole special and what would be in it. And after that, it went to Quintanilla at Blue Book, who had spent 3 days editing the script to make sure it fell within Air Force guidelines of the material available. And so it was still on topic in 1966, but it doesn't stop there. In 1980, the reason Thornton Page, is acquainted with Frederick Durant, besides for like the Robertson Panel and whatnot, so in 1980, when the Smithsonian held a UFO panel with, people like Thornton Page, Sagan, etc., Frederick Durant was the panel moderator. So he was involved with the UFO topic to some at least limited extent for probably a good 30 years or so, for whatever reason that may be.
He was, and that's a good point. And he's also the rare bird that we can pretty conclusively establish he was actually a CIA officer, according to his FBI file. And I really haven't even dug much into him at CIA, but yeah, he's one of the rare ones that we can pretty conclusively establish that. In fact, I'll read this next section briefly because I wanted to talk a little about Durant. The FBI informed me in a 2020 FOIA response it was unable to identify records on Frederick Durant III. However, the Bureau advised a file transferred to the National Archives and Records Administration was potentially responsive. A subsequent FOIA request was submitted to NARA. In March 2021, I received an interim response from NARA stating the file was located and an initial assessment revealed Frederick Durant III to be the subject. NARA informed me the file contains an estimated 50 pages expected to take 39 months to process at a total cost of $40 for a reproduction. I go on to explain more about that specifically. Then, interestingly, NARA stated the FBI file in question was created between July 1952 and December 1953. As is the case with FBI investigations of others in our story, such as Nicholas de Roquefort, this suggests the Bureau was looking at the activities of Mr. Durant during the same time as is of interest to us. Specifically, the Robertson Panel met in January 1953, and the FBI file was apparently created during the surrounding months. Once again, the date the records were compiled looks to be right on target. There are a number of reasons potentially responsible for our recurring FOIA timeline of good fortune. For instance, the FBI may have been called upon for security investigations on certain individuals. That certainly does not make the circumstances any less potentially intriguing. I also find it interesting that FBI files tend to provide glimpses of long ago investigations into many varieties of people and their activities. While we might tend to think we should look to the CIA to study a CIA project, it becomes increasingly apparent there is a likely chance J. Edgar Hoover had files on the project personnel and related activities as well. Such records stand to offer alternative perspectives than we might expect to find, for instance, by reading approved CIA material. History clearly shows us there were rivalries and power struggles between agencies. Hoover would not have accepted without question the motives and intentions portrayed to him by CIA officers. Neither would he have fully trusted their competence in screening personnel and protecting classified information, even if their stated objectives were expressed relatively authentically. Given what CIA officers were doing during this specific point in time, the early 1950s, Hoover's potential doubts would have arguably been well justified. The existence of FBI investigations and resulting files seem to often validate our interests and circumstances. A FOIA request submitted to the FBI on Dewey Joseph Fournette Jr. was immediately closed. And in this section, I go on to explain how I basically volleyed a number of requests with the FBI about Fournette and had trouble with that request. They eventually claimed to me that they did a search but did not locate responsive records. I'm not entirely satisfied with that for obvious reasons, and may come back at it one day. But I mean, what are you going to do if they tell you no responsive records? There's a couple reasons that might happen, like there may be no responsive records. Maybe they're destroyed because I just cannot envision how this man would not have had FBI records. It's also possible that they're not subject to the FOIA and that the FBI is not required to tell me of their existence if what they have is not subject to the FOIA. I actually tend to agree with that law more than not, that like if there are records on security personnel, security officers, CIA officers, and they're not subject to the FOIA, they really shouldn't like have to tell a Russian FOIA requester that they have records. You know, like if somebody's in an informant in the Oklahoma bombing, Dad gummit, they asked us about our informant. I guess we're gonna have to tell them about the records. Just doesn't make sense, you know. But I do not see a scenario where the FBI did not compile records on Joseph Fournette Jr. Or Dewey Fournette Jr. But so be it. I did want to speak some more on Frederick Clark Durant 3. So I did get those records back, those FBI records. There is a blog post at EFR. I will include that blog post link in the video description. And he repeatedly checked out as an exemplary CIA officer. His contacts, his character witnesses all had great things to say about him. He was fine. And then after he had already served on the Robertson Panel in 1953, the FBI discovered it had records that indicated his uncle was a manager of TASS, the Russian news agency, for like 20 years. And they reopened investigation of him, and post haste, here's the header of one of the documents that I obtained. You can see November 1953, that they have now realized that he had an uncle, manager of the TASS news agency from 1920 to 1944. And Assistant Director Ladd was asking, how did we miss this? Which is a somewhat interesting story in itself. A female was working at the FBI that was part of the investigation on Durant, and she labeled files NR, which is no records, so nothing significant. And in those files that she labeled, that was the information about his uncle working with TASS. And they only discovered it later. For however they discovered it, I don't recall if they even said. And the woman no longer worked at the FBI at the time that happened. So were they just blaming her? Was there something more there? I don't know. That's kind of an interesting story. But in follow-up investigation, they still cleared him and found him to be fine. But I thought you might find this interesting, the way they investigated him and the extent the FBI would go to even this many years ago was that they went to the telephone company. They went to a former employee, a couple of former employees that we might reasonably suspect were some kind of domestic employees, postmaster, and they did determine that Durant had not been in touch with his uncle and did not have a relationship with him on an ongoing basis. But that was a kind of interesting, in a number of ways, interesting side plot to even the best, strongest candidates. If you look far enough, you're still gonna find some kind of doubt or indication that they have to, that they have to keep clearing them for security again and again and check them again and again and again. So any thoughts about any of that, guys?
I don't, it's kind of interesting that his name is Kenneth. Like, because I remember James Carrion was talking about the name Kenneth, and its in the Kenneth Arnold case, its potential use in
Mm,
counterintelligence. So, yeah, but it's probably just a total coincidence, and Kenneth is just was a more common name back then, I'm guessing.
interesting. Interesting.
One
Uh,
other thing that I thought that it was interesting, going back to the previous passage where we were talking about Durant and Fournette, I thought it was really interesting that Fournette, that uh, I'm sorry, hold on a second.
take your time.
Um, oh yeah, in regards to the Robertson panel, that they were saying that the cases he cited were basically raw, unevaluated reports. So it kind of makes him sound like maybe he was either deliberately like being deceptive about these cases, or that he was just very, that he was a hardcore believer in UFOs.
I noticed that line too. It made me think of Mick West and the low information zone. I think that's a good way to put that. And
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah.
go ahead.
Maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but what the panel's comments make it sound like is that Fournette was being misleading, or else that um, that he was bolstering these cases, that don't have as much evidential merit, basically.
Yeah, yeah, it does. It certainly leaves that possibility. And while I agree with that perspective, and I think that low information zone is a good term, I think that's a good way to look at it.
Oh, I do too. I like that term.
I can also understand the frustration of people that go, well, you can't explain this one. And somebody just shrugs and goes, well, if I had more information, I could. And it's like, so you're just damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And
Yeah,
it's
okay.
like, that's what burden of proof is all about. Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah, that's a great, yeah, the low information zone, that's a great point to bring up at this point in time, because Fournette was not thinking in terms of that sort of way of looking at UFOs. And it could be, just to restate kind of my point, is it could be that he was aware that, oh yeah, these aren't well supported cases, or he could have just been very credulous.
Yeah. Yeah. Good points. Thank you. Would
Rachel, now
you?
I have the REM song in my brain. What's the frequency, Kenneth? Thanks. Gonna be singing that now.
Nice.
There could be worse songs to sing.
Yeah, REM's good. That's a good song.
So I was so when Robert Barrow interviewed Dewey Fournette in around 1976, Dewey Fournette did say he was a UFO skeptic when he was assigned to the program initially, but that within the first few months of his assignment, he basically became convinced that the subject, was real, deserved serious study. he doesn't say that that means there are alien spaceships or anything. He says if nothing else, then it could be a Soviet attack, that we need to be prepared for. But he stuck around the UFO topic. He went to that Fort Arkansas UFO conference in 1975. He was present, and I'm pretty sure that's probably where Robert Barrow got the photo of him that he used in an article, because he interviewed him for an article about the movie UFO that was kind of a docudrama that came out in 1956, that I just recently posted again because it happened this week is when the anniversary is. And he was involved, of course, in that documentary project as well as Ruppelt was as well, with analyzing it and making sure the information was factually accurate. And they both, Ruppelt and Fournet, agreed that the documentary was, factually accurate as far as they know, pertaining to cases. But yeah.
Thank you. Care to read now, Sharon?
I do. Let me see.
The Glomar FOIA response
Okay.
after the section on Fournet.
The Glomar FOIA response, neither affirm nor deny, arose out of a Cold War deception operation conducted through a collaboration with high-profile billionaire Howard Hughes. The intriguing story might be considered to carry implications to events surrounding the wealthy, controversial philanthropist Robert Bigelow, who has more recent history of involvement in questionable projects with intelligence agency funding and personnel. In 1968, a Soviet submarine armed with nuclear missiles sank in the Pacific Ocean. After 2 months, the Soviets called off their search, conceding the ocean was simply too large to find the vessel, combined with the fact it was probably resting more than 3 miles underwater. The sub represented quite an intelligence target to American officers. A plan was subsequently formulated to locate and ultimately retrieve it, and thus was born Project Azorion. Howard Hughes was enlisted to aid with a cover story to deceive the Soviets. He announced he was launching a venture to build a customized ship to mine valuable material from the ocean floor. In reality, the vessel would have a submersible vehicle with a claw designed to pull the sub to the surface. The operation took hundreds of millions of dollars and 6 years to execute, but the Hughes Glomar Explorer remarkably retrieved about 40 feet of the 300-foot Soviet submarine. It took about 2 months from the time the Glomar set sail. By 1975, the operation began showing up in media reports. Rolling Stone magazine filed a FOIA request to which the CIA responded it could neither confirm nor deny the existence of any such records. From there, using the term to avoid addressing material which, if existent, would be properly classified and exempt from FOIA disclosure, became known as the Glomar response.
Thanks, Sharon. Any thoughts on any of that or correlations to things we see today?
I think the response of, that we can neither confirm nor deny is a very different response from we don't know. Which is
That it
interesting.
is.
Which unfortunately leads to conspiracy theorists to believe that when you get the Glomar response, that's somehow confirmation of what they believed was true, when in fact it's really a non-answer. It's like we're not bothering with any of it. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it could mean that they don't know, but I feel like if it was just like we don't know, they would probably just say we don't know. I don't know.
These days, it seems the no, I can neither confirm nor deny response comes a lot more often from alleged whistleblowers and self-proclaimed whistleblowers than the government.
True enough. Yes. Yes.
which of course is confirmation to believers of the whistleblowers.
Yes.
That section's interesting.
Thank you.
That we just read there.
Yeah, I would like to learn more about that. And the involvement of Howard Hughes is also interesting, you know, it kind of makes
Very.
it.
I think it also like that gives us a look at the tip of the iceberg, I think, of how I had mentioned that the CIA had an interest in wealthy, cultured men that traveled internationally and that could migrate from one social circumstance to the other easily. I think that probably truly did fool the Soviets. That, you know, that I don't think they would have been suspecting that he was up to something. And I think that says a lot about some of these harebrained, or potentially says a lot about some of these harebrained Robert Bigelow activities and things like that. That, you know, I've used the example before of the Argo story that, you know, the CIA used its contacts in Hollywood to set up a fake production company as part of exfiltrating personnel out of Iran. And that's an extremely convoluted chain of events to get to the objective, and extremely effective. That it's really difficult to figure out some of that stuff if you're not read into it, if you're not part of it.
Yeah, Jack, you've said before about, you know, the Argo case, that, you know, these people are really good at their jobs, right? And if we had a million guesses as to what the CIA was up to, you know, with a fake film company and a UFO type narrative, science thought, we would never have guessed that it had something to do with exfiltrating some State Department members from an issue that they had been stuck there for weeks. Yeah, it's just we never would have guessed that, right? Most people.
Right. Right. Would you like to continue reading, Sharon?
Sure. During the time the CIA was manipulating political matters in Guatemala, it also took an active interest in Tibet. Writer Amish Raj Molmi, is that correct?
Sounds like it to me.
Okay. Noted the presence of references to political unrest in the region while exploring CIA declassified documents on UFOs and the Yeti. Yes, Bigfoot. Molmi documented in a 2019 article for the Kathmandu Post how Cold War era documents relevant to the area included UFO sightings as well as an alleged crashed saucer. There was also a 1959 memo from the American Embassy in Kathmandu to the State Department in Washington advising about regulations on mountain climbing expeditions conducted in Nepal and related to the Yeti. The memo explained, among other stipulations, payment to Nepal was required for Yeti hunts, and permission from the Nepalese government was necessary prior to publishing any news about the existence of the creature. This may very well be related to the 1950s CIA effort to assist Tibetan rebels in resisting Chinese occupation. CIA support was given in the form of arms, training, propaganda, and other resources. In 1955, a leading CIA operative reportedly posed as a tourist in order to confer with Tibetans at a Himalayan village. The American outlined a program to overthrow the Chinese in Tibet, and such infiltration of the borders became common. The operation did not match the results obtained by, do you just say PB success?
I do.
Okay, in Guatemala, and was eventually referred to by one CIA account as a military disaster. An American ambassador to India, briefed on the failed effort in Tibet, called it particularly insane enterprise.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Thank you, Sharon. I appreciate that.
The CIA, they show up everywhere.
Yeah, I think I got the idea from reading through some of the records that Nepal was like, I think we know that these are intelligence personnel and we're going to charge them extra for like their Bigfoot parties and they'll pay it. Like that was the idea I got, that it was all a big fiasco kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this when you were talking about Argo and that kind of stuff because Steph Polonia was telling me about how some of these early cryptozoologists who sometimes also are kind of these like Dos Equis sort of most interesting man in the world kind of characters, that they could be potentially, being sent to like study the Yeti, like Ivan T. Sanderson, or I don't remember who was directly involved in that like early Yeti
Keel went over
expedition.
there too. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Ah, interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. But yeah, it seems like some of these guys were probably being recruited by the Pentagon to do other stuff under the cover of Yeti expeditions.
One of the things I think NICAP may like, there may have been somewhere in the Pentagon, in the CIA, people that had the idea of sending people to remote areas under the guise of doing UFO research was a cover story, would seem viable to me. Yeah, like if like how there's these non-government organizations that do peace negotiations and take foreign aid. And so they like have offices in all of these conflict zones. And to me, that kind of screams, intelligence assets. I could see where somebody would get an idea about that for UFO research too.
Yeah, I remember something that stuck in my head from an earlier chapter was when you were talking about when NICAP was organized and going through the process of what that looked like and how they, like were reaching out to local, law enforcement, and other organizations to like be like, hey, please send us your UFO reports kind of thing. Seems very innocuous, from the point of view of, oh, they're just a citizen UFO research organization, but they're actually gathering all of this information from law enforcement organizations, from police and other types of organizations like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which again is something that we've seen in recent years, that different upstart UFO organizations want people's archives and all of these reports and things that seems like, well, yeah, sure, why wouldn't they? And then it's like, how many times do we have to reinvent the wheel? Which makes you wonder, so what are they doing? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one more reason personally why organizations like MUFON and stuff like that should keep all of their data public and not private. And it's very suspicious that they would keep it private, in my honest opinion. Like, there's no good reason for a quote unquote scientific organization like that to be keeping their data private.
Yeah, it raises questions, that's for sure. Are you up for reading, Jeff?
Yep, sure.
Thank you.
The error also included what the CIA would later claim was responsible for an increase in UFO sightings, its U-2 spy plane. The agency rather sensationally suggested in 2014 the plane accounted for some 50% of UFO reports during the 1950s and 1960s. However inaccurate the claim may be, the U-2 saga carries intriguing implications for some of our NICAP characters. The inaugural pilots in the mid-1950s for the secret program are among the earliest documented instances of sheep dipping, an intelligence community term referring to the staging a person's military retirement. In reality, the person becomes a covert operative. The process typically involves doctoring the official personnel records of a career military service member. Efforts to solidify perceptions of a new yet fictitious lifestyle for the undercover operative may cleverly include the misleading letter writing to family and friends about the supposed new plans. As one writer jokingly portrayed the contents of such letters, quote, "And that's why I decided to leave the Army and pursue my life of definitely not being in the CIA," end quote. If all this weren't confusing enough, while the U-2 program was taking flight, rather remarkable strides were made in an operation known as Project Palladium. Its implications to reported UFOs are astounding. CIA man Gene Potiat penned a now declassified article published in agency literature describing some 15 years of mid-20th century information warfare and the development of electronic countermeasures. Initial efforts to confuse enemy radar and conceal flight paths of aircraft evolved into increasingly sophisticated weapons of deception and intelligence gathering. By the 1960s, Potiat asserted a scheme was developed that could electronically generate and inject carefully calibrated false targets into Soviet radar, deceiving them into picking up and tracking ghost aircraft. An aircraft could be simulated of any size, at any speed and altitude, flying on any path. Each Palladium operation involved the CIA team with its ghost aircraft system, an NSA team with special communications, intelligence, and decryption equipment, and a military operational support team. Covert Palladium operations were carried out against a variety of Soviet radars around the world, Potiat explained. The CIA officer described one such operation off the coast of Cuba. The Palladium teams were positioned in an attempt to collect intelligence on the sensitivity of Soviet radar. A false U.S. fighter plane was made to appear to be flying from Key West towards Cuba. Fascinatingly, a Navy submarine was coordinated to surface just long enough to release a timed series of balloon-borne metallized spheres of different sizes. The spheres were released into the path of the oncoming ghost aircraft. The idea was for the false fighter plane to initially alert the Soviet radar. Then the Palladium team would monitor communications and responses to assess which balloons the radar was tracking or missing. They got the information they went after, Potiat wrote, as well as some excitement and entertainment. Cuban fighter planes began circling where the submarine surfaced and released the balloons, and another gave chase to the ghost aircraft. We had no trouble in manipulating the Palladium system controls to keep our ghost aircraft always just ahead of the pursuing Cuban planes, Potiat explained. When the Cuban pilot radioed back to his controllers that he had the intruding aircraft in sight and was about to make a firing pass to shoot it down, we all had the same idea at the same instant. The technician moved his finger to the switch, I nodded yes, and he switched off the Palladium systems. I have FOIA requests submitted to multiple agencies citing Potiat's report and pertaining to Project Palladium. They are pending as of this writing. It might seem rather stunning in hindsight that UFO researchers who focus on the mid-20th century don't typically make more of the impressive operation. We might also question how intelligence officers who subscribe to UFO beliefs could perpetually be so oblivious to reasons such information might remain classified that of course had nothing to do with saucer cover-ups. Before we are too quick to judge, it should be noted electronic warfare continued to evolve. It indeed carries strong implications to today's UFO genre, as reported at the war zone. In spite of that being the case, it is rarely included in the collective conversation.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks. Yeah, Project Palladium is something. I have been waiting about 6 years now for a final response on that material from the CIA. The NSA has already denied the request. They glommarred the request. Yes, balloons. Balloons went up. They put, that's so dirty, isn't it? They put balloons in the projected path of the Phantom aircraft on radar. So, of course, one would presume this metallic sphere is operating the way my radar tells me a craft is operating. And there's a lot of stuff to this that in fact, I think we'll stop here for the evening to discuss this a little bit, and then we'll finish up the rest next time of this chapter. As one of the many implications to all of this is in current times, when we hear about these drone sightings or, sensationalists try to make them UFOs around ships off the coast of California and things like this. And people will say, if they were just drones, why don't they shoot them down? Mr. Podiat is explaining there why they don't shoot them down, because what's being monitored is the response to these activities. And balloons are cheap. Small drones are cheap. And why would they let 3 balloons go? Why not just one if they're just trying to confuse the pilot? Well, confusing the pilot was just a byproduct of the exercise. They were actually trying to determine how sensitive is the Cuban Soviet radar. Does it see all 3 balloons? Does it see only 2? Does it see the largest one? And that would be the answer to why American forces aren't shooting things down when they see it from American Navy ships. They don't want to indicate what they're seeing, what they're not seeing, what weapons response they would have in a battle situation. There's just a lot to this Project Palladium story.
I just want to point out that a lot of these balloons and I remember Tanner was writing about radar chaff as well. I don't remember what the context was, but these are often made out of mylar, which is basically a type of plastic that turns into microplastics, and it doesn't really go away. It just sticks around in the environment. So a lot of this stuff that mid-century industrial America was doing, and the military, we're still suffering from the consequences of that. And we're still using these materials on a regular basis, so that mylar is, and other microplastics and as well as these forever chemicals, they hang around in our bodies and in the ecosystem, and it's really awful.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Mhm.
Yet another thing that I feel like this material could be helpful with for UFO investigation is if we could identify dates and locations of Project Palladium missions, we could cross-reference that, like with the work that Jeff and Rachel do on, this whole catalog of UFO cases, and see where they match up. Like this is pretty classic UFO behavior for like the 70s and 80s of, the pretty classic tale was erratic behavior, it disappeared, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, because a lot of these sightings that Jeff has talked about in the past are very similar to this, where it's like, oh, this could be a balloon. And, I could totally imagine that the pilots involved in this case would be confused and tricked by, parallax illusions and stuff like that. Absolutely.
And you'd have every reason to believe that whatever you got eyes on was behaving in the manner that your radar is telling you a flying object is behaving. Yeah. So your narrative would be, I saw this orb-like thing and it did this and did that and that would be the narrative. It reminds me a little too of, there's a man, name escapes me, of course, at this time, that keeps a log of satellite and rocket reentries, like man-made artificial things that re-enter. And that can be used to cross-reference UFO sightings. And there often, is a UFO sighting with satellite reentry or something like that. And kind of the telltale thing there, in my opinion, is people will say, no, it wasn't that, it was this, it was the other. But if it wasn't the reentry, well, then the sighting report should include the reentry was there and I saw. So, like you should see both then.
Yeah, I was just about to make that point, and also, oh shoot, dang it,
Right out of your
I right out of my. Well, I was gonna say, Mick West and the people at Medic Bunk, like Flarkey and stuff like that, they're really good at doing that. By the, for people listening who don't know this already, that there are a lot of sightings that actually are identified in this exact way. And like another really good example is James Oberg, who's identified a lot of really weird Russian sightings, like the Petrozavodsk sighting in the late 1970s. That was again one of these, like some sort of booster rocket or something. Um, Exploding or spinning high up in the atmosphere and creating this huge space jelly type display. Also, that Norway spiral that I was talking about, I think, on another in an earlier chapter. That's another great example. And I even remember talking with a friend about that sighting and being like, well, I mean, if there was a Bulava missile, booster rocket in the sky at that time, creating this display, then you have to explain why the thing that people were filming isn't that, you know.
Right, right, right. Other thoughts, anyone?
It's interesting how one of the theories of what the 2004 Nimitz UFO cases is was actually something called Silent Hammer, which was a test being done there in at least October, so in the weeks before the Nimitz event, where they were using submarines to launch encapsulated drones from underwater that would go up into the air. And so that's been one of the theories put forward as a kind of a skeptical explanation of what people were seeing in that specific incidents. And again, the War Zone has a great article all about Silent Hammer that people could read if they were more interested.
Thank you.
Yeah, certainly things like Project, Nemesis and the continuing furtherment of those programs as technology develops. We're still using stuff like radar, right? So it would stand to reason that projects like that would still be existing in some form, right? Um, and certainly need to be entertained when we're talking about things like the Nimitz event, right? And they're talking about um, radar readings that are confusing or that are immediately from the top level of the radar's breach to the bottom in seconds. And again, when we see that there's issues with balloons and trying to fool radars, and they just had a radar update, yeah, a lot of salient connections there.
Yeah, and I mean, people are really clever and talented. I give them 65 years to improve on something, they can come up with a lot. That electronic countermeasures began as just dropping aluminum strips out of airplanes to try to confuse radar. And from that, they came up with that setup Podiat described of being able to project a craft of any size and altitude at any speed they wanted on enemy radar. And the challenge here with finding these resources and using these tools is getting them to UFO investigators that want explanations for the cases they're working on. That's the challenge.
Another thing I wanted to point out about Mylar is that, which, there's a lot of balloons that are made out of Mylar, not just like toy balloons and stuff like that, but also a lot of these balloons. I think potentially the Project Palladium balloons were Mylar as well, but also radar chaff as well, but is made out of metallicized Mylar. And a huge hazard with Mylar is that Mylar balloons actually get attracted to like transformers and power lines. And so they actually will because they'll have like a static charge and it'll get attracted right to this thing with an electromagnetic field and explode, and it causes huge powder outages, and even like sometimes fires get caused by this kind of stuff. I guess there was like a big fire caused by a Mylar balloon in Germany, like I don't know, around 10 years ago, I want to say, that killed a bunch of animals in a zoo.
Wow. Wow. Interesting about the attraction to electricity.
Yeah, it's incredible how often Mylar and Mylar balloons come up in the topic decade after decade, again and again. It's like one of the number one UFO culprits, right? Even stretching all the way back to the Roswell case and the NYU balloons. They were made out of Mylar. And, I'm sure people are very familiar with the claim of the alleged metal material that was collected that could be, crushed in your hand, and then it would return to original shape when you released. And again, Mylar, does that, not in the sensational way that you might imagine, people imagine when they hear this. But if you take a Mylar balloon and you crumple it in your hand and then you let it go, it'll pretty much go back to its original form. And in the
Yeah.
1947, most average citizens didn't know what Mylar was. They had not seen Mylar balloons. They weren't popular party um, balloons yet, but yeah, it's really interesting how time and time again Mylar comes up in the topic.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I love that. That's one of my favorite like little factoids about about Roswell. But like also I just wanted to say that like it's hard to like overstate just how big of a problem Mylar balloons are. Like there are actually whole organizations that like speak out about this and like keep track of it because it's like literally thousands of Mylar balloon accidents happen every year or something like that. I don't want to like try to put a specific number on it because I don't remember. I don't know enough of the details, but yeah, it's pretty horrible.
Hmm.
And even the military and government representatives have been really transparent about the fact that air clutter like Mylar balloons is such a problem. In fact, it's the number one threat to air traffic is Mylar balloons.
it's and just point out that the whole idea of ECM or electronic countermeasures, like being involved with like kind of faking UFO sightings, actually goes back, a little bit back there to a guy named Leon Davidson, who in 1959 in a newsletter by James Mosley, Saucer News, published an article, a kind of infamous article titled "ECM plus CIA equals UFO," where he argues electronic countermeasures in the CIA could have been responsible for like the 1952 Washington airport case, and a couple of other cases at the time. So that theory has been out there since at least the late 50s, and there are some other UFO cases, historical cases that are kind of weird because they involve the object returning an IFF response, which is a friendly, kind of response, that we use to basically identify our friendly aircraft so we don't fire on them. And the question is, why would a UFO be issuing back an American IFF, friend or foe response, to these planes? And in some of these cases, like a famous kind of radar case in the Southwest U.S., I believe in 1957, one of the arguments was that it was in fact a CIA ECM operation to see, if they could fool like, these planes into thinking that they were picking up a UFO on radar. And of course, there's no proof of that because, there's no records and nobody's ever owned up to, performing such an operation. But the theories out there, and there are at least a few cases in UFO history that would make more sense than a Soviet target or even an extraterrestrial target.
Thoughts, Sharon?
I was just thinking back to the Howard Hughes bit, how I've said before, I'll be reading along and then all of a sudden there's this little detail with notable people that all of a sudden is, oh, I've got new dinner party trivia.
Yeah, there's
Never know when it's going to show up, but it's going to show up.
There is a very talented writer and researcher named Anna Merlin, who I saw on social media one time. She posted something to the effect of, "My party trick is talking about the CIA till everybody walks away." But yes, there are all these things that a lot of people had brushes. That would be an interesting book in itself, wouldn't it? To try to like put together a collection of the Julia Childses and the Howard Hugheses that were CIA assets. Yeah.
To say, help us do this fabulous thing, this clandestine fabulous thing, and somebody with a big ego and lots of money would seemingly jump on that.
Yeah, and it would probably get them favor, like over 6 years that it takes to do that, and the millions that are being spent on it, one would presume would certainly get you favor in other contracts and things, other bid proposals or leeway with things you want, permission, permits to do and things.
I feel like
when you put it that way, Pan Am that he was involved with, that alone would be a really good CIA asset.
For sure.
Yeah, I feel like too that back then, that there was a much more widespread sort of belief in America. So like
Right.
So there were a lot more people at that time, I think, would have been very willing to like do something for that if they thought that it would promote, freedom and democracy. I put that in kind of air quotes because, I think it nowadays it's a lot more easy to parse out this kind of like constructed ideology that comes from certain quarters of the government and from conservatives, from like maybe like a more universal idea of freedom or democracy or something like that. And so like yeah, I think there have been a lot of people that have been willing to work with the CIA if they thought that it was going to help people in other parts of the world.
Absolutely. It was seen as patriotic. The FBI and the CIA and the State Department were viewed as respectable. That was more the public perception. Absolutely. Men with money and influence wanted to be in those circles. I don't think they were real hard to recruit at that point in time. Any closing thoughts, anyone?
How many, I have to look here. How many chapters are in the book?
I think we're about halfway through the number of chapters.
Okay.
Which is, are there 13? I don't have the book in front of me.
So there's no, so I've got more little new, exciting tidbits to learn, don't I? Yeah, there's 14.
14, yeah. Yes, there are still some more tidbits coming. Yes.
Man,
And
we're more than halfway done already. It can't be.
Right.
now's a good time again to reiterate that if you would like to join us, you can. Getting caught up and browsing what we've discussed before is as simple as browsing YouTube. Go to the Expanding Frontiers Research YouTube channel, find the playlist Wayward Sons Book Group, and it's all right there. We record every Wednesday night, then we upload it to YouTube. So you're welcome to join us. I'll provide you with a free searchable PDF and just email me and request Zoom invitations. You'll find all the information in the video description. Join us visit us at expandingfrontiersresearch.org. Find our Expanding Frontiers Research Patreon. And if you're moved to donate, we would really appreciate it. Your contributions go towards FOIA fees and administrative costs, such as video production and those types of costs. So thank you for joining us. I really appreciate each of you in the panel. Thank you, and we will see you next time.
Take care, all.
Thank you.